Good morning, everyone. So, I am making final preparations before I have my presentation later today. It's one of those things where I have a lot to do, but because there's so much, I kind of don't know what to do first. But I'm very confident in my presentation. I did a test run, I think either yesterday or the day before. I'm thinking of doing another one before I go out and do the show for real. Very, very excited to get that going. Here's Wasabi here. Wasabi, you guys know what I'm saying? You attacked the camera, you beastly creature, you. And I kind of had to postpone because apparently we were supposed to. Hold on, let me clean my lens here. Apparently my tub was supposed to be fixed up because there's a crack in it, but I had to reschedule just because with everything going on right now. And really, it's not really all that much. It's just a bunch of stuff I have to bring in order to get my presentation going. We still don't really know the specs of the place yet because we never really looked, but I'm bringing pretty much my own equipment to do my presentation. Funny boy, why are you climbing up? So glad I captured this. So right now I'm working on chapter 2 and it's going pretty well. And yeah, it's one of those things where for sure, once you do it again and all the ideas and all the things that were wrong get, ironed out, it just kind of flows out of you, So I'm going to continue on this and then, get it going. The question is, am I nervous? The answer is, not necessarily. I do feel the similar bodily reactions of nervousness that we're all familiar with, the tingliness, the kind of jitteriness, and a little sweaty, but it's only because I'm excited. Can't wait to blow everyone's minds. And I will see you guys in a bit. We will find out in just a bit. But the reason why I'm stalling for time is to also tell you that no matter where you are in the whole process, it's all about persevering and continuing on regardless of what happens. Thank you, Oren, for volunteering to be my slide guy. All right, starting off. Triumphantly, real heroes creating your protagonists. As you all know, my name is Gary Medina, and then, sir, if you will. Bit of an introduction. If I'm going to be quite honest with myself, when I was a kid, my mom once asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up. I remember looking at her dead in the eyes. I said, "Mom, I want to be a supervillain." And I remember, she was sad at the time because she had seen what the bad guys were doing in the shows that I was watching. And I think the reason why I wanted to be a villain so bad was because of the freedom that they had. But not just that, the type of flaws that they showed and how human they were allowed to be. I used to watch a lot of those Fleischer Superman cartoons with the really good animations, but Superman's super invincible, but all the bad guys, they're just doing what they can and doing what they want. And I guess that's what appealed to me as a kid. But we're not talking about villains today. We're talking about heroes, protagonists, the good guys. The guys or gals who are going to be the main vehicle in your story. The ones who are going to follow, what the camera's going to follow throughout the entire narrative of your work. What we're going to talk about tonight is knowing your main character, where the writers fall short. This is going to be a controversial one. We may see some chairs fly in the air. But again, yes! I want to inform you, I don't have a degree in any of this. This is years of being locked in my room, watching stuff, reading stuff, playing stuff. Just literally me being a nerd, absorbing all of this. So this is my experience. And then finally, how to overcome these problems. The last part is going to be the nitty gritty. I'm not one of those guys who's going to sell you snake oil. I'm going to give you actual solutions. Or if you will, knowing your main character. What's the difference? And this is what I mean between a protagonist and a hero. And this is just a bit of a reference. After this slide, whenever I say main character, I mean both, pretty much the character we're going to follow throughout the story. But I'm going to separate them here, right now. A hero is typically an exceptional person with exceptional goals and are characterized by the values of the society they were created in. Think of, I'm going to use this example a lot. Superman, created in the 40s, used to represent the American ideal. We were going through a war at the time, so naturally he was all about truth, justice, the American way. Or think about the 80s, some of the comic book heroes created then, very anti-establishment, anti-hero sorts. A protagonist, like the hero, is the vehicle in which the consumer, or the reader, navigates the narrative. Their goals are a bit more self-serving. They don't necessarily hold up the ideals of the society where the writer is writing from. One is meant to inspire and signal virtues, and the other is a reflection of the writer's perspective of the world around them. What are the other purposes of the main character? See this image right here? This is a term I like to call birds for scale. You may not see it, and I might not have the clearest resolution on my TV, but there are birds right here. These specks of dust are birds, and the building right there is how huge it is. It's showing you how big it is. I like to call it birds for scale. Your main character is the scale of power and competency in the world that you build. An example, think of, have you guys ever watched House? Right? In that show, and this is just my own type of linguistics, Dr. House is the most powerful character in the series. I'm looking at it from like an anime and comic book perspective, but what I mean is he's the most competent character in the series, in which him figuring out the solution is what moves the story along. So Dr. House is the most powerful character in his show, but put him in a Marvel movie, he is just a regular guy in the background. That's what your main character serves. He doesn't have to be the strongest, or she doesn't have to be the strongest, but they are the scale of where your world rules are. A hero would typically be at the top. They'd pretty much be the strongest or the most competent person in that universe that you created. A protagonist typically isn't, which makes them more relatable whenever they overcome their problems and fight within that system that you created. And this creates an opportunity for growth versus opposition. With growth, that's typically for your protagonist, for someone who's weak in their own world. This gives them a chance to grow as the narrative moves along. Whereas for your hero, this gives them a chance for opposition. That is up to you as a writer to come up with challenges, opponents, physical, mental, natural, in which they would take on the opposition. So growth and opposition. Your main character is birds for scale. Why do I have this? This is a very simple representation of the idea of geocentrism. It was an old way of thinking back then in which everything revolved around the Earth. We know that to not be true anymore because we have evidence. Or if you will, the geocentric vibes of your main character. How much can your main character affect the world around them? And again, we are speaking as other purposes for your main character. Typically, the less they do, the less they affect the world, the more relatable and less virtuous they are, in which they're more like you and me. They make mistakes, they're not perfect, they're flawed. But if they can affect the world more directly, they are less relatable, but more virtuous. They hold up those ideals, but we can't fly, we can't lift cars. At least I know I can. And figuring this out informs how other characters will interact with your main character, the geocentrism. How do other characters react to your main character? Are they indifferent? Do they revere them? Do they despise them? And if they despise them, how intense is it depending on your main character? So, this image right here is pretty much world building. A little bit more of that. Shaped by their world. Your main character's disposition, power, and even appearance is the result of the world around them. Pretty much, if you're making an apocalyptic story, more than likely your main character is going to look like someone who hasn't showered in a good while. Whereas if you have a dystopian future where everyone's wearing white and everyone's all neat and clean, more than likely they might not have hair. So that's what I mean with that. their virtues and wants can also inform the type of society you are building in your work. They can fall right in line and highlight the mechanics of your world, in which we're talking, your economy, your law, pretty much the philosophy of the world you're building. Your main character can embed these ideas, or they can run in complete opposition to it. Either way, the way your character feels, what their virtues are, what they want, also informs how your world works. So, where do writers fall short? Oren, I apologize to you. I wouldn't say you championed the hero's journey, but you did mention it. And folks, I'm sure any of you who've ever looked at a website have heard of the term the hero's journey. It's one of the flaws to modern heroes today.
I've never heard of it.
I'll get into that. Pretty much the first problem with it is the memification of the modern hero. And the problems with that are the hero's journey, just a vehicle, the Superman effect. Here's where the heroes are going to start flying. I don't hate Star Wars. It has plenty of flaws. Let's get that out of the way. And the reason why I bring it up, I'll explain in just a bit. The hero's journey, or the monomyth. Now, we all have heard, like most of us, if some of us have heard of Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It pretty much is supposedly kind of the guideline in which you write your stories. I disagree with that. But before it was even discovered, it was actually discovered by a noted anthropologist named Edward Burnett Tyler. Tyler wasn't a writer, he was an anthropologist. And all he did was look at myths back in ancient history and kind of saw the pattern which created the hero's journey, in which you have a hero, he gets a call to action, he goes and gets the opposition, he comes back with the elixir.
So like that.
Exactly, like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, all of those. And like I said, Tyler was an anthropologist, not a writer. He made an observation of the recurring themes in mythologies and narratives with the same purposes. Those purposes were to inform ideals, write a power fantasy, that's going to be something I'm going to get into, or uphold the morals of the society they lived in. But since Campbell's work was published, the monomyth has been consciously applied to fictional worlds. Even Lucas himself acknowledged that, yeah, I used this formula whenever I was writing Star Wars. Here's where the problem lies, and it's not going to be on the slide, and there's a reason why I have him up here as well. With Star Wars, it came out and he applied it beautifully, told a beautiful story, everybody related to it. You can go back and read, online forums where like me and my buddies just went every weekend when the movie came out. Problem was, you see success like that, and it gets repeated over and over and over again. Once you see it once, you kind of seen it all. And why do I have Master Chief here? For all you gamers out there, he is the vehicle. He is the main protagonist. He is invincible. No one can touch him, but he's the eyes that you view out of. Just a vehicle. Since myth, main characters have been used as a vehicle for power fantasies. These vehicles don't have much depth, save for the tacked on traits and hot flaws. And I'll get into that in a little bit. This is pretty much kind of a flaky excuse, like, no, my character has personality, I promise. But when they're treated as just a vehicle, typically they don't have a lot of connections, or at least token connections. The characters around them have heavy to extreme reactions when they are around them, and ultimately they have the power to affect change in their world, but no one is allowed to be indifferent in them. Anyone who disagrees with them is an enemy that has to be destroyed. Their main love interest is always the prettiest one in the world. Very much everybody has an extreme reaction when they're around. No one's allowed to just kind of walk away and ignore the main character, just a vehicle character. And typically, their villainous counterparts are either just as uninteresting, or maybe the writer gets a little creative. And the reason why I bring up Halo, a lot of game writing is done by committee. They hire writers, but here's the guidelines we want you to follow. The writer can get creative, like, okay, if I can't mess with Master Chief a lot, what if I start messing with this antagonist, give them real depth, make them feel real? And I think this is why I related to villains as a kid, because they were allowed to be more complex, as opposed to the just vehicle heroes. And of course, there's nothing wrong with it, and I'll explain why at the end. There's nothing wrong with it, but you see it enough, you've seen enough. So, put a sad Superman there. About to get into the Superman effect. The Superman effect. Pretty much, I'm not even going to read this, I'm just going to explain it. Sometime in the history, kryptonite was introduced as Superman's weakness. The reason being, the writers finally figured out, holy crap, Superman is totally boring because he has no flaws, he has no weaknesses. Their weaknesses are there just to raise stakes. They're a plot device. They don't inform their personality or what they want or what they value. And it doesn't inform their moral failings. Kryptonite is just a plot device. If you put a plot device as their weakness, you have a weak character. It's very hard to relate to a god in a world of mortals, because we're all mortals. But when your main character is too strong, too competent, too put together, I'm talking about, your main character is rich, suave, very good looking. I mean, I think everyone here is beautiful tonight. But not all of us can be super rich or have our stuff together. And it's very hard to relate to a character like that. Their moral code. Oh, yes.
I don't know. The rich, put together, handsome guy just made me think of like those romance novels.
Yes.
With the vehicle, main female protagonist, and then the guy is just like perfect.
And while I would love to tear into that genre, at the end I'm going to explain why that's not always a bad. Why it's not always a bad thing to have just vehicles. Why it's not always the worst thing in the world. Why sometimes it's okay. Yes.
I don't know how I'm sorry, I'm not an English major. How are you using the word vehicle? I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah. Vehicle is pretty much your main character. Vehicle as in, I like to think of it as a metaphor. You are the reader, thus you are the driver. The main character is the vehicle you hop onto, and you navigate the story with the main character as your vehicle, if you will.
So you're saying, okay, I can't see what it.
Yeah, I should make it bigger.
Serve as a plot device.
The weaknesses, yes.
So how can you tell when you're writing something if this is just a plot device or if it's something real?
We'll get into that for
Okay,
sure.
okay.
Oh yeah, we'll get into that.
Okay.
And finally, their moral code wins out against every opponent with an opposing view. This was a big one here. It's pretty much what they believe in is how the world should be, in which anyone who believes different than them are always stomped to the ground. No, you're wrong. I am right because I'm the most powerful person in this universe.
Only a Sith believes in absolutes.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, only a Sith believes in absolutes.
Exactly. How to fix this? I like to call this concept bullets through armor. Now, with everybody, and this is a more philosophical side of things, as far as there's two sides of the same coin, heroes and villains. Then we're going to douse the hot flaws, and then we're finally going to make the hero feel real, or ugly them up. And this is where it's going to be, you're concerned about whether it's a tacked on flaw or if it's something real. So we'll get into that. In the real world, there are no villains. No one actually sets out to do evil. There are no villains cackling and rubbing their hands together in glee as they contemplate their evil deeds. There are only people with problems struggling to solve them. That was by Mr. Ben Bova. He wrote a lot of Star Wars books. Most people who are hardcore nerds prefer the extended universe over the main canon, but that's neither here nor there. All right. Two sides of the same coin. Here we're going to get a little philosophical. And I love to blabber on about that. Now, the two sides of the same coin, what determines who is right and who is wrong really depends on where the lens is focused. You are the lens. The writer, you are the lens. And in a way, you kind of decide who's right and who's wrong. I'd love to see, boy, am I going to say something controversial here? I would be interested to see if a writer took the point of view of a terrorist in his native country to see, these imperialists come and invade his homeland. In that writer's eyes, the terrorists are the good guys, whereas, the troops coming in are the bad guys. Very much who decides who's right or wrong is really who's behind the lens and where it's focused. What informs a main character's view of right and wrong depends on the past and the world you created for them. Tragic past and how the world treats them very much also informs how your character reacts to the world around them. If they have a tragic past, maybe here's where they can be amazing. They have a horribly tragic past. The world is cruel to them, but throughout it all, they still choose to be righteous and good and treat everybody with respect and help everybody as they could. That right there, you already have a complex character. He has enough reason to hate the world spite it, spit at it, but still chooses to stand up for it. That was just literally 3 seconds just now. It's not incredibly hard to write complex characters, but I think we think too much about it, which is the problem. Don't be afraid to dangle, stretch, or pull these ideas of what's right and wrong for your characters. Don't be afraid to tear it apart. Don't be afraid to make them suffer, make them be in despair. And what makes a villain or a hero can even be the smallest difference of one bad day, as I said before. They could witness their family dying, and maybe then they spite the world and become a villain, or they can be the hero. I have a smoking guy, shirtless, abs, super hot, brooding chick, beautiful, dark eyes, brooding in the darkness. Another girl, maybe she's on drugs and neon lights are hitting her, she looks super dramatic. Why did I pick these images? Well, we're about to douse hot flaws, and this is what we're referring to. A hot flaw is a tacked on trait to make the main character feel real. And this is where, they're the most invincible person in the world, they're the best looking in the world. Oh, but they happen to be an alcoholic, I swear. Like, they have flaws, they're an alcoholic. I mean, they're hotter than everybody around them, they're stronger than everybody, they can fix a car in 3 seconds, but they drink, okay? And that's a hot flaw. A hot flaw is a tacked on trait to make your character feel real when they should be real. Their hot flaw informs how they operate, in which if he's an alcoholic, he's bitter, he's angry, he talks to everybody mean, but it doesn't affect how they function, how effective they are. He doesn't stumble around or drop things because he's totally in control. But he's an alcoholic. I swear he's flawed, And I feel, and here's where we're going to get a little real, because I love to get real. Hot flaws, I feel, comes from the subconscious fears from an author of making their creations look weak. And then we can stay here for a little bit. This is unscripted. I didn't prepare this. This is just my own personal opinion. I think when the term Mary Sue was first introduced in the literary circles, it kind of put a stigma of putting self-inserts into your story and putting yourself in your stories, right? Everybody's afraid to do it. There's circles around that accuse us, or rather, like, that's just self. You just put yourself in the story. I disagree. I feel if you want your character to feel real, it's okay to put yourself in the story. In my novel, I'm in my story with a different name. And why wouldn't I be? I'm an interesting guy. Why wouldn't I be a character in the story, Yeah. And I feel like the reason why we put on hot flaws on perfect people, we're too afraid to show them sniveling and cowering and crying in the corner, because we feel like it's a reflection back on us. Like, I don't want to present that to the world, but if you don't, your work doesn't feel real. That's where the problem lies. We put on hot flaws because we want the person to feel approachable, but then when they get to us, that character is just like that door. No personality, it's just functioning to get you to one place to another. So, ugly up your main character. Now, Bunny, you did talk to me about this, and I hope you remember I did bring this term up of uglying up your main character. What I mean is, a little bit of more philosophy, maybe if you guys are alone in your shower, maybe think about this. I'm a happy-go-lucky guy, but I like to talk about really deep and dark stuff, as you can tell. Think about the flaws within yourself that make you cringe, the flaws that you just hate about yourself. I'll be straight up. I can be clingy, I can be needy, I can be selfish, I have all these, my own hang-ups, my own demons. Take what you know, take what you hate about yourself, and stab your main character with it. You gotta do it. Have people around them in their world that criticizes their views, their actions, their beliefs. This allows them to bounce and stretch in the rules that you've created. They have to figure out, well, how do I improve? How do I get better? People love to see your characters get better. And it's good to poke at them and get people to say, you know what, you're wrong. I don't think what you're doing is right. Show how their ideals are wrong, or at least wrong in different cases and right in others. You don't have to completely curb stomp your main character. Let them have one little victory now and again. Make them have that one little victory. And it can't even be that dramatic. It can be, you know what, I went into work, The boss said that I was doing really good. That's all I need. Don't be afraid to psychoanalyze yourself in these pages. And before I continue on that, I'm going to read the final point. Writers are a breed of psychologists that run experiments on their characters. I'm going to get into this one a little bit. I want to thank Shayla because she let me borrow a book recently. And literally the first chapter talked about this, and it asked a very important question. And maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. We'll see. Pretty much the question is, who decides what's normal? You know? When it comes to psychology, we have a basic idea of what's normal. As long as you're not stabbing anybody, eating someone's face, you're good. But then you think about, you think about stuff like depression and anxiety. Who decides all that? And who decides what's normal is such a big concept, but we've accepted that it's this Freudian kind of circle, and as long as it fits in a book that a doctor has, I forget them, it's a very long title. As long as you fall in these symptoms, this is what's wrong with you. Well, who says that you are? With writing, you can, instead of thinking, oh, you have depression, here's some pills. If you're a writer, oh, you have depression, let's push it even further and see how you'll react to this. Let's throw you into the water and see if you sink or swim. If you sink, sad ending, still a good book. If you swim, happy ending, still a good book. So
The chair's coming, Gary.
the chair's coming.
Can't have a sad ending.
Yes. All hail the sad ending.
I do want to inform that real quick, if I can. And it's been on my mind before I came up here today. Writing is such a beautiful thing. It really is. It's the one thing where there are so many rules, and all of you guys who are trying to self-publish or publish or get your query letter out there, get an agent, there's so many rules, so many loops to go through, and yet it is also the one medium where you can do whatever you want. It's so strange. It's a strange contradiction. Writing is beautiful in that way, in which you can do everything wrong while also doing everything right. But after their flaws are informed and developed, their flaws inform how they view the world, how they interact with other characters, and how they proceed to a natural conclusion. Here's where I say happy ending, sad ending. Not every ending has to turn out well. They can pretty much, you're in full control, and all that it asks of you is to connect the points after you understand your character's flaws and how they react and how they're going to get to the natural conclusion. A part of your story involves your main character overcoming, which is what we typically see, the happy ending, succumbing, the sad ending, or coexisting with those flaws. No one really thinks about coexisting, because let's face it, a lot of people in the world, they have their problems, and sometimes they're just not going to get over them. Sometimes it's going to stick with them for their entire lives. And if you want to write a story that feels real, sometimes the endings have to be, you know what, I didn't get what I want, but I'm better than I was yesterday. And that's always a much better ending than just giving your character everything he wants. You can. I mean, it's writing, you can do whatever you want, but that's just my personal opinion on that. In conclusion, and I could have saved you all this time by saying this one thing. If you want to write a real protagonist, get real with yourself. Is very much what I'm getting at. And it just going back to my last point, life isn't perfect. And I understand, and I'm going to inform the vehicle situation. Life isn't perfect. Life sucks sometimes. And this is why we have character vehicles. This is why we have these stories today where the characters are invincible. Because these stories serve as a way to escape the real world. These stories serve as a way for us to get out of our own BS and just be powerful for once. This is why I say it's not always the worst thing in the world to have a character vehicle. But if you want to write a protagonist that feels real, get real with yourself. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vinny with you. I hope you enjoy. Thank you.